Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, when you sent in your sources about cultural Marxism, I knew this was going to be a fascinating one.
Yeah.
Especially given your interest in covert contracts and relationships. We're going to really unpack how these big ideas might be playing out in your own life.
What's key here is that understanding the historical roots of these ideologies can be like finding a hidden blueprint to how society operates. It's like suddenly being able to see the framework behind the walls, the beams that hold everything up.
Okay, let's get into it.
Sure.
A lot of our sources point to this thing called the Frankfurt School as a starting point.
Yes.
What exactly was that, and why is it important for us to know about?
The Frankfurt School was this group of intellectuals back in the early 20th century who decided to shift the focus of Marxist thought away from just economics and towards culture.
Interesting.
It's like they realized that to truly change society, you need to change the stories it tells itself, the values it holds.
So instead of workers seizing factories, it's more like an ideological takeover of the institutions that shape culture.
Precisely.
Wow.
And that's where figures like Antonio Gramsci and Georg Lukács come in.
Okay.
Gramsci, an Italian Marxist, developed this idea of cultural hegemony.
Yeah.
Basically, he argued that the ruling class stays in power not just through force, but by controlling the dominant ideas and values of society. They get people to consent to their rule without even realizing it.
That's super relevant to the whole covert contract thing, right?
Absolutely.
Like there are these unspoken rules and beliefs that we inherit and operate under without even questioning.
Absolutely. And Lukács, a Hungarian Marxist, took this idea a step further with his concept of the long march through the institution. He believed that to really change society, Marxists needed to slowly infiltrate key institutions like education, media, law, and even the arts. By controlling those levers of influence, they could subtly shape the culture over generations.
Okay, so how does this all connect to the idea of cultural Marxism specifically?
Right.
How does this Frankfurt School stuff translate to the world we're living in today?
Well, the idea is that the theories of the Frankfurt School laid the groundwork for what some people call cultural Marxism. This is a complex and contested term, but it generally refers to the idea that Marxist ideas have infiltrated and are actively shaping Western culture, aiming to dismantle traditional values and institutions.
And that's where we start to see those covert contracts playing out, right? Like these institutions that we think are neutral are actually pushing certain ideologies that shape our relationships and expectations.
The source material explicitly argues that cultural Marxism seeks to upend traditional power structures, particularly those related to gender and family.
So it's not just some abstract theory, it's actually impacting the way men and women, the expectations they have of each other, and the way they navigate relationships.
The authors of these books argue that it's like an iceberg. What we see on the surface is just the tip. The real action, the real power dynamics are happening beneath the surface, hidden from view.
Okay, so we've got this foundation with the Frankfurt School and these ideas about cultural hegemony and a long march through the institution. But how does that actually play out in the real world? What are the tactics being used to push this agenda forward?
One of the most prominent tactics discussed in the sources is political correctness. It's presented as a way to be sensitive and inclusive, but the authors argue that it's often used to shut down dissenting opinion and enforce conformity to a specific ideology.
I can definitely see how that plays into the covert contract idea. It's like you're expected to go along with certain beliefs and language, even if you don't agree with them, because the social cost of speaking out is too high.
Exactly. And the book highlights several examples of this, particularly around the issue of gender. For instance, it points to the term rape culture and argues that it's often used not necessarily to address actual instances of sexual assault, but to promote a narrative of female victimhood and male guilt.
It's like they're saying that language itself is being weaponized to control the narrative.
Precisely. And shape our perceptions of reality. And the source material doesn't shy away from strong language. It calls political correctness a Trojan horse and even compares it to a form of psychological warfare.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
It is.
What other tactics do they talk about?
The books also delve into things like social shaming, historical revisionism, and the manipulation of language. The authors argue that these tactics are all designed to control public perception and silence dissent.
They specifically mention the trend of tearing down statues and renaming buildings as part of this historical revisionism.
And the point they're making is that it's not just about erasing the past. It's about replacing it with a narrative that fits the current ideology.
Okay.
They argue that it's an attempt to control how we understand history and, by extension, how we view ourselves and our place in the world.
It's like they're trying to rewrite the covert contract of society itself.
Exactly.
Changing the underlying assumptions about who we are and how we should behave.
Exactly.
And that's why understanding these concepts is so important.
Yes.
Especially for men who are trying to navigate relationships in a world where the traditional rules and expectations are being challenged and redefined.
Absolutely.
This is a lot to take in.
It is.
We're just starting to peel back the layers here.
Yeah.
But I already feel like I'm seeing things in a new light.
That's the power of knowledge, isn't it?
It is.
It helps us to understand the forces that are shaping our world and to make more informed choices about how we want to live our lives.
Speaking of forces shaping our world,
Yes.
one of the sources talks about a deliberate war on masculinity.
Right.
Can you explain what they mean by that?
This is a recurring theme throughout the source material.
Okay.
The authors argue that there's a concerted effort to undermine traditional masculinity, portraying men as inherently problematic, bumbling, or even dangerous.
They use a really interesting example from a popular TV show where the male cop is always incompetent
Yes.
and needs to be rescued by his female partner.
Right.
Yeah.
And they argue that this kind of negative portrayal, repeated across media and culture,
Yeah.
can have a real impact on men's self-esteem and their sense of purpose in society.
Yeah, it's like it creates this covert contract where men are constantly expected to apologize for being men.
Exactly.
And to prove that they're not part of the problem.
It can lead to a dynamic where men feel like they're constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to express themselves authentically for fear of being labeled as toxic or problematic.
This definitely resonates with a lot of the conversations happening in the Red Pill community. There's a real sense that men are being unfairly demonized
Yeah.
and that the traditional roles and expectations for men are under attack.
And the authors of these books argue that this is a deliberate strategy, part of a larger agenda to dismantle traditional power structures and reshape society according to a specific ideological vision.
Wow, that's some heady stuff.
It is.
It's like they're saying that the very definition of what it means to be a man is being rewritten.
The author of one of the books is very clear about his perspective.
Okay.
He believes masculinity is being twisted and undermined by those who seek to control men, and that it's time to reclaim it.
So we've got this war on masculinity playing out.
Right.
But how does globalization fit into all of this?
Well,
The source material seems to see it as a major threat.
the books argue that globalization is eroding national sovereignty and individual freedom.
Okay.
They see organizations like the European Union as examples of how globalist agendas can chip away at the power of nation states and impose a one-world government.
One of the books specifically talks about the euro and how it caused economic chaos in countries like Greece and Italy.
Right.
Yeah.
And their concern is that these global entities are often unelected and unaccountable to the people they govern.
Okay.
They worry that this leads to a loss of individual freedom and autonomy,
Right.
as people are subjected to rules and regulations that they have no say in creating.
So it's like there's this global level covert contract being imposed on us without our consent.
That's one way to look at it. And the authors argue that we need to be aware of this and resist it to protect our national sovereignty and individual freedom.
Okay.
They believe that strong nation states are essential for preserving the unique cultures and values of different people around the world.
It's like they're saying that globalization, while it has its benefits,
Yes.
also carries the risk of homogenizing culture and erasing the diversity of human experience.
And they believe that this erosion of national identity and sovereignty can have a profound impact on our personal lives, our relationships, and the way we see ourselves in the world.
This is all really thought-provoking stuff.
It is.
We're covering a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're just getting started. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were getting into some pretty heavy stuff about globalization and its potential impact on individual freedom.
Right, and that ties into another theme that runs throughout these sources, the rise of the surveillance state. It might sound a bit like a conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
but the authors of these books are very serious about the dangers of unchecked surveillance.
Yeah, and it's not just about governments spying on their citizens.
Right.
The source material talks about how technology is being used by corporations and even individuals to monitor and control behavior in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago.
They point to the proliferation of CCTV cameras,
Yeah.
the data collection practices of tech companies,
Right.
and the increasing use of facial recognition technology as evidence of this trend.
One of the examples that really stuck with me was the case of China and its social credit system.
Right.
It's like a real-life Black Mirror episode where people are constantly being monitored and their behavior is scored with real-world consequences for those who don't conform.
Exactly. And the authors argued that this kind of surveillance, even when it's not as explicitly Orwellian as China's social credit system, can have a chilling effect on free speech and dissent. It creates an atmosphere of fear and self-censorship, where people are afraid to express their true thoughts and feelings for fear of being watched and judged.
It's like that old saying, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear.
Right.
But these sources are saying that's not really true. Even if we think we're not doing anything wrong, this constant surveillance can still erode our sense of privacy and autonomy.
Absolutely. And the authors connect this back to the broader themes of cultural Marxism by suggesting that the surveillance state is just another tool that can be used to enforce conformity and silence those who challenge the dominant ideology.
So it's not just about protecting our privacy. It's about protecting our right to think freely and to dissent from the prevailing narrative.
Precisely. And the source material argues that we need to be vigilant in defending those rights, especially in a world where technology is making it increasingly easy to monitor and control our behavior.
Okay, so we've got this concerning trend towards increasing surveillance.
Right.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another area where the source material expresses some serious concerns. The health crisis and the potential corruption of medical science.
This is a really interesting section because it delves into the influence of powerful institutions on our health and well-being. The authors raise concerns about the role of pharmaceutical companies, government agencies, and even global organizations in shaping healthcare decisions.
One of the examples they use is the opioid crisis.
Yes.
They argued that it was fueled by the pharmaceutical industry's aggressive marketing of these highly addictive painkillers, often downplaying the risks and overstating the benefits.
Right. And they connect this to the idea of covert contracts by suggesting that there's an implicit agreement between patients and these powerful institutions where patients trust that these entities are acting in their best interests, while in reality, profit motives or other agendas may be at play.
It's like they're saying that we need to be more critical consumers of health information. To question the narratives that are being presented to us.
Absolutely.
And to do our own research before making decisions that could impact our health.
They argue that we can't just blindly trust authority figures, whether they're doctors, government agencies, or pharmaceutical companies. We need to be our own advocates, to ask questions, and to seek out alternative perspectives.
They also talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and the way it was handled. They raise concerns about the suppression of alternative treatment, the potential conflicts of interest among scientists and government officials, and the use of fear and manipulation to promote compliance with lockdowns and other restrictions.
And they argue that this whole experience highlighted the dangers of blindly trusting the expert and the importance of critical thinking, especially when it comes to our health and well-being.
It's like they're saying that we need to be more discerning about the information we consume. To question the motives of those who are presenting it. And to be willing to think for ourselves.
And they encourage readers to seek out alternative sources of information. To be skeptical of official narratives. And to be willing to challenge the status quo.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've spent the last two parts of this episode going pretty deep down the rabbit hole of cultural Marxism, exploring its origins, its tactics, and its impact on so many aspects of our lives.
And we've talked about how these ideas can shape the covert contracts we operate under, the unspoken rules and expectations that influence everything from our relationships to our understanding of the world.
Exactly. But now let's get to the part I know you've been waiting for. What can we actually do about it? Because it's one thing to understand the problem, but it's another thing entirely to find solutions.
The source material offers a variety of strategies, and I think the most important one is the simplest. Don't give up. Don't surrender to cynicism or despair. The authors are very clear that they believe change is possible, but it requires action.
It's like they're saying, okay, you've taken the red pill now. What are you going to do with that knowledge?
Exactly. And they emphasize that action can take many forms. One of the most basic is simply becoming more aware of the tactics being used to manipulate us.
It's about learning to spot those red flags, those little things that might signal someone is trying to control the narrative or push a particular agenda.
The books talk about things like propaganda techniques, logical fallacies, and the way language itself is often twisted to distort reality. Once you start to recognize those patterns,
Yeah.
you're much less likely to be swayed by them.
It's like developing a kind of mental immune system to protect yourself from ideological viruses.
That's a great analogy.
Hey.
And the source material also emphasizes the importance of questioning everything. Don't just blindly accept what you're told, even if it comes from authority figures or sources you typically trust.
So it's about cultivating a healthy skepticism.
Right.
A willingness to look beneath the surface and ask, okay, but is that really true? What's the evidence?
Exactly.
Who benefits from me believing this?
Exactly. And that leads into another key strategy. Seeking out alternative perspective.
Okay.
Don't just stay in your echo chamber.
Right.
Make an effort to expose yourself to different viewpoints,
Right.
even ones you might initially disagree with.
It's like that saying, iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
You need to challenge your own beliefs and assumptions by engaging with people who see things differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one way to do that is to engage in constructive dialogue.
Okay.
Now, this can be tricky,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about highly charged.
Because it's easy to get sucked into those emotionally driven arguments where no one's really listening and everyone's just trying to score points.
But the authors emphasize that it's possible to have productive conversations,
Yeah.
even with people who hold very different views.
Yeah.
The key is to approach those conversations with respect, with a genuine desire to understand the other person's perspective.
It's like building a bridge instead of throwing bombs.
Exactly. And that ties into another strategy,
Okay.
focusing on building community. Connect with like-minded individuals, people who share your values and your...
It's that idea of finding your tribe, right? Because when you feel isolated and alone,
Right.
it's easy to get discouraged. But when you have a strong support network, it's much easier to stay motivated and to keep fighting for what you believe in.
Absolutely. And that leads into another point that's emphasized throughout the source material.
Okay.
Don't underestimate the power of individual action.
So it's not just about waiting for some big political or social change to happen.
Right.
It's about each of us taking responsibility for our own lives and doing what we can to make a difference.
Right. The books talk about things like supporting businesses that align with your values, being more mindful of the media you consume,
Right.
and even just having those difficult conversations with your friends and family.
Because sometimes just planting those seeds of doubt,
Yes.
getting people to question the narratives they've been fed, can be incredibly powerful.
And of course, there's always the option of getting involved in more organized political activism.
So supporting candidates who share your values,
Right.
volunteering for organizations that are fighting for the causes you believe in, even running for office yourself if you're feeling really ambitious.
Right. And the books emphasize that even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Every time you choose to speak out,
Yeah.
to challenge the status quo, to live in alignment with your values, you're making a difference.
It's like that butterfly effect thing, right?
Exactly.
One small action can set off a chain of events that leads to something much bigger.
Exactly. And I think that's a really hopeful message.
It is?
Because it means that even in the face of these big, seemingly overwhelming forces, we're not powerless. We have agency.
Right.
We can choose to fight back, build a better future for ourselves and the people we care about.
That's an incredibly empowering message.
Yeah.
So if our listener wanted to keep diving deeper into this topic, where would you recommend they go from here?
Well, I definitely encourage them to check out the full books we've been discussing.
Right.
They go into much more detail on all of these topics, and they offer even more practical advice for navigating this complex world. You can find them on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Oh, perfect.
Just search for the titles we mentioned earlier.
Great advice. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. I hope it's been as thought-provoking for you as it has been for us. Remember, the first step is awareness. Once you see the world through this lens, you can't unsee it. But that's not a bad thing. It's actually an opportunity to take back control, to make different choices, and to build a future that aligns with your values. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.